Okay, so let's dive in and have a look at doing a master for this. So if I bus all these bus channels, or bus 13, don't like it when it's bus 13. Okay, so if I bus all these together, we have silence. So this is going to be my stereo, kind of stereo mix channel. Okay, so let's have a look at a little bit of EQ for this. So this, again, I'm just trying to do the same thing I've been trying to do all along. It's just escape the speakers, be nice and loud, and try and create as much space and depth as possible. A way I like to do this is a little low cut, not too low, because sorry, not too high, because you don't want to take away any body from things, and then a little low shelf here, and then a little dip can help the bass sink a little bit and things to be, you know, just stretch a little bit down. Let's try something a little bit similar at the top. So a little cut for the frequencies we don't really hear. High shelf, push the high frequencies up, and a little dip underneath just gives us a little bit of a kind of focused highs, little bit of air, and takes away some of the frequencies we can't really hear. Linear phase. Feel a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, a little bit bigger, a bit smaller, slightly bigger. Let's do a little mid-range boost. Looks like we're kind of a little bit, got a little bit of a kind of dip here. This can be quite a nice thing. Is actually just kind of visually just see if there's any areas that jump out and any that are a little bit less, and you can do kind of a very broad strokes. So what we're doing in mastering is always broad kind of strokes. We could try something like that and see if it helps. Yeah, helps make things a bit more solid. So everything together. To me it's a bit bigger and a bit more balanced. Okay, so let's jump across to a Kramer tape, which I use a lot for mastering. Now this can boost the low end quite a lot, but we'll have a look at that. What it does is gather things up and bring them out, make them more present. Yeah, it's done a really nice job actually. Just brings it out, glues things together a little bit. Okay, let's try a little multi-band compression. Now we're going to try a few things with this. Try and hold the bass in place a little bit. Now I'd like to try something just on the kind of this kind of area here. I'm going to try a bit of expansion, so I'm going to use a negative ratio. So we're kind of going in the opposite direction. And using the threshold, we can determine how much we're going to dial in, but it's basically increasing dynamically the mid-range. A little bit more balanced. solid. Let's try it with a hard knee. Let's take that off. I think it feels more balanced like that.
So it's about how.
Yep, comes out a bit more, feels a bit more balanced across the frequency range, I'd say. Okay, let's try a little bit of like fatness kind of compression. So we'll do this in parallel. I've got a nice preset here that I use, that I've made, which is like a kind of I've called it my RMS preset. So we've got very, very low threshold, very, very light ratio, and then a kind of slow attack and slow release. So you'll see it just adds this kind of real thick compression. That's what it sounds like. So we're just like right in the kind of the meat of the track. So I've got 3 dB makeup gain. If we dial that in, we'll get a thickness that's added. Now what we could even try doing is actually EQ this a little bit. Let's actually boost the EQ up a little bit, so we're kind of enhancing what we were doing. Okay, sounds quite fat. Take that VU meter off, don't need that anymore. Now another thing I like to use is MV2 in your mastering, just to try it out. Again, this is like a loudness thing really, just get all the juice out we can. So again, this is a low level compressor, so it brings up sounds that are below the threshold. So me having said I had enough headroom, I'm hitting the master a bit too hard, so I can just use my output to dial that down a bit.
So it's about how.
It does mean I can't A and B particularly well, but I'll do the A and B with it on, but let's just take down the output a little bit. Can make things sound a little bit harsh, but I'm gonna leave it in. Okay, a little bit of stereo spread. These are always things I'd always try out just to see what happens. I don't like to spread in the mid-range unless there's a reason, because if you think about it, if you have instruments that span across this range and you start changing the stereo spread for the different ranges, like let's say that synth bass stab, that means the upper range will be spread, the lower range won't, and it starts to feel disjointed. So I don't tend to do that. I tend to spread in the upper area above 10k. It gives you a nice stereo width. try monoizing the low end, even though I'm sure it's mono compatible anyway.
Bring in the house. Bring in the house.
I sometimes play with the stereo-wise control as well.
Bring in the house. Bring in the house. Break it down. Right. Bring in the house. Break it. Bring in the house.
Okay, I think I might take the MV2 off.
Bring in the house. Break it. Bring in the house.
So on the vocals, there's something which is going crazy.
Bring in the house.
There's a crazy amount of high-end distortion going on.
Break it.
Just there. I don't know if that's something I've done or whether that's just part of the sound.
Break it. Break it. Break it. Break it. Break it. Break it. Break it.
It's also got a lot of low end in it.
Break it.
I wonder if I can try this. There's a deplosive from Isotope.
Break it. 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 Break it.
Yeah,
Break it.
it's done a pretty good job of getting rid of that actually.
Break it. Break it. Break it.
Okay, so let's have a look at using Soothe to just try and get rid of some of this.
Break it. 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 Break it.
Okay, let's try that in the mix.
Break it. Break it. Bring in the house.
I'm just actually going to leave it because, you know, it is a kind of a dirty sample and that's part of the charm. So, okay, so let's go back. Okay, so what I like to do next is clip slightly the master. Just keep it slightly in place.
Break it.
Okay, so
Bring it.
with the clip, I'm just trying to literally shave off a bit of the transients, which means the next limiter, which is going to be our final step, is going to have less work.
Bring in the house. Break it down. Right. Bring in the house.
Get really fast. Okay, and then we have our final limiter. Now I like to use this master assistant setting, and the reason is that I've already done the mastering in terms of how I want things to sound kind of sonically, and this master assistant means it sets a dynamic EQ which kind of like very subtly and transparently takes away frequencies that it thinks are going to affect the transparency of the limiter. So it's quite a useful thing to go for. So I'll put it onto CD, which is a louder point. I don't really bother with the other settings. I need to play the track. Okay. Probably should actually play it at the busiest kind of moment.
Raw feeling. It's a thousand house, 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 house.
Break it. Bring in the house. Break it down. Right. Bring in the house. Break it. Bring in the house. Break it down.
So EQ wise, obviously this looks like quite an extreme EQ, but the problem with this, with iZotope Ozone, is that it doesn't know that it's tech house. So it's thinking, wow, where's all the mid range? Where's all the lower mid? But there's no vocal. That, you know, so it's kind of analysing it against music which isn't relevant. So it's worth listening to it and taking it in and out and see what it's doing. So often I just kind of I just go, okay, so that's what it's decided is lacking a little bit or too much of, and I usually kind of just soften it a little bit, and often it does slightly improve things. Okay, so there's that dynamic EQ, so it's doing little dips. If things get too much, and it's a real help on the limiter to make sure that it's acting transparently. True peak means we won't get into sample peaks. The character you want to set as fast as possible to avoid clipping if you want it to be really loud. And then we just bring down the threshold, which is increasing the input essentially, until we get a nice fat level without any audible distortion. So let's do this with our multimeter up. So you can hear it's really starting to break up now. So we're obviously very, very loud on the meter. But this becomes a taste thing. So I would never have my master as compressed as that or as limited as that, because I like things to sound more dynamic. And I think club sound systems appreciate dynamic masters as well. Okay, so this was our original. So we're not looking, obviously it's not a fair test now because this is mastered and that was a pre-master, but sonically we're looking for, you know, are we escaping the speakers more? So does that sound more flat? The pre-master, does this master sound, does it groove better? Does it escape the speakers? Does it sound a bit bigger? Does it open up when we listen to it? I think it does. I wonder if I've gone a little bit too heavy-handed with the multi-band compressor. So I might just dial that back a little bit. And maybe bring the parallel chain down a bit. yeah, so what I'm confident in is that basically it makes me want to nod my head more like this.
Bring in the house. Break it.
Yeah.
Bring in the house.
To me, that feels more flat. And there's a reason for that. It's because at every point of this process, I've used compressors that have got musical timings. So really, we should be enhancing the groove of the track because the compressor's pumping in and out at an eighth note or a 16th note or whatever the value is I've chosen. So it's not, it's not the same as putting a sidechain compressor on or programming a certain part to do a certain thing. But having the compressors pumping musically, I think has made it more groovy. It's more flat. And then it opens up
Bring in the house.
and it grooves a little more.
Break it down. Bring in the house.
It's a bit more straight, flat.
Break it.
So that's what I was going for throughout this whole process. That was the aim, was to be able to eke out a little bit of extra vibe, groove, separation, bigness, wideness. Let's just check how we're doing on the master level here.
Bring in the house.
Yeah, so we're peaking at minus 0.3. Now you could. This is as I said, a taste thing. I would err on the side of dynamic rather than over compressed.
Bring in the house.
Yes, we've only got a couple of dB of limiting because we've already got a clipper which is doing.
Bring in the house.
Like tops half a dB or something. And if we really wanted to push this further, we could actually limit each individual bus as well. But because this is already such a well put together track, I don't feel like I needed to do that. And level wise,
Bring in the house.
we're pretty loud, and we've still got where we can go a lot further if we want to.
Bring in the house. Break it. Bring in the house.
And then it becomes a question of, we could, if we wanted to kind of push it further, we could experiment with kind of compressing the bass a little bit more, holding it.
Bring in the house. Break it. Bring in the house. Break it. Bring in the house.
So it's kind of a balancing act between getting the loudness and also, you don't want to have audible distortion, and the low end takes up so much energy that if you have too much low end, then it will cause the limiter to distort. So I really hope you've enjoyed me taking you through this process. And what I've tried to show you as much as I can is using these tools to be able to kind of tap into the way that we hear, and it being more of an overarching principle than just this compressor does this, blah, 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 blah. It's more kind of how do we actually trick the listener into believing that the sound coming from the same place has got depth to it and height and things like that. And the way we can use EQ and compression and reverb and distortion and things like that to achieve all those things, and also within the context of what the music is as well. So I've really enjoyed going through the track. It's been great to work on such a well-produced tune. And just thanks a lot for being with me, and hopefully you've enjoyed seeing the process and you've learned something. Cheers.